So with that, I'm excited to hand things over to Andy. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Katie. All right, so everybody knows today that we're here to talk about the Femap API and helping streamline your workflows. Now, I would assume most people are familiar with what Simcenter Femap is, but that's where we're going to start. And then we're just going to kind of answer these questions along the line. So just for anybody who might not be familiar with Femap, what it is, it's a pre and post processor for finite element analysis. It's developed and maintained by Siemens Digital Industries. The pre-processing is building the finite element. The post-processing is basically being able to interrogate your results after you've used a solver. Femap's CAD neutral. It's also solver neutral, but deals with a lot of the industry standards such as SimCenter Nastran, MSC Nastran, ANSYS Abacus, and LS Dyna. And just so everybody knows, that SimCenter Nastran is another Siemens DI product. And then again, this is just a picture of Femap. It's just looks like a lot of other Windows applications, especially analysis applications. So, you just basically have menu structure, toolbars, etc. Okay, so what we're really here for today is what is an applications programming interface? And from now on, we're just going to call it an API. So what it really does is it gives you programmatic access to an application, and it's typically supported by like a product's development or support teams. So what it allows you to do is basically, access menu commands or toolbars by, just providing the needed arguments in order to run those commands. A lot of them also have objects, and objects typically relate to a type of entity inside of the application. And then there's going to be some properties and methods for each one of those objects. And then some tools which can actually help you leverage an application's core and underlying functionality. And the big thing about the API, in almost all cases, it's almost impossible to use any program's API without good documentation. But you got to remember that most documentation for API is going to be much more like a reference manual than something you read, cover to cover. So here's just some overall information about Femap's API. So it's OLE-COM based programming. So it contains literally hundreds of functions for use with either Femap's integrated development environment, IDE, which we're going to talk about that, using a VBA style, like a Visual Basic for application style language. But you can also use the API with Visual Basic C, C++. A lot of people are using something like Microsoft Visual Studio, or they're using Visual Basic for applications from within an MS Office application like Excel, Word, or Access. And just because we know a lot of newer engineers are really familiar with Python, you can absolutely use the Femap API with Python. You just have to do some initial steps in the beginning, such as create the type library in a very particular manner. So why would someone want to use any API? Simple things. You can add functionality that's not really in the product. You can automate repetitive tasks. You can allow communications between multiple applications for data exchange, ensure quality of new and incremental enhancements. You can also create consistent workflows among like an engineering group. And actually, and this is something that we've seen people do with the Femap API, is actually use the application's underlying capabilities for tasks that they were actually never originally developed. So, I mean, that's certainly something interesting. So again, why would someone specifically want to use the Femap API? You can create programs that guarantee use of an organization's proprietary methods, such as creation of fasteners. A lot of different airframe companies, they all have a different way they do fasteners. So a lot of times it's just great to be able to automate that particular process. You can also try to reduce the learning curve for new users by providing tools kind of designed around a typical workflow that they might encounter day to day. Compute required results using parameters for a specific project. So, things such as margins of safety. Move data to a program like Excel or MATLAB, or have it move from Excel back into Femap. And then big one here at the bottom is automate generation of customized analysis reports, which follow a common template and formatting. So I mentioned an integrated development environment, or IDE. What is this? It's basically like a one-stop shop for when you're coding. So essentially, it allows you to, it gives you developer tools, allows you to edit the source code, debug, all in one application, and it just allows you to streamline coding. They kind of enhance the productivity by offering features like syntax highlighting, code completion, which is a big one, and in some of the more powerful IDEs, you're getting version control as well. And again, it's just the entire idea here is just to provide a unified interface. Some like PyCharm, which is shown here, are free and designed to be language specific, in that case Python. Others, like Visual Studio Code, are also free, but support multiple programming language, including Python. And then a lot of times, if you're going to be doing any kind of more heavy-duty development, that's where you're going to want to get into something like Visual Studio. You know, which has to be licensed, but it offers an entirely different level of functionality compared to some of the free offerings. And just what I'm showing here in this picture is actually the way that you can create the Femap type library from the type library, from the Femap type library. So now that we've talked about the API and IDEs, does Femap have one? Yes, it does. It has the API programming dockable pane. So you can open this up by just going into either the tools programming or just clicking the icon in the panes toolbar, and it'll open up this API programming window within Femap. And don't worry, we're going to get into that very, very shortly. So what does it offer? You know, the one thing to know is it's not actually Visual Basic. It is, but it's very, very similar to Visual Basic. And it's actually a programming language called WinWrap. So it offers so when you're in the API programming dockable pane, you get syntax highlighting, code completion. If you want to create some dialog boxes with common controls, you can do that through the user dialog editor. And that dialog box shown on the right was one that was created completely within the API programming window. And the other nice part about it is it creates .bas files, which only contain text. They're not compiled or anything of that nature, so that they're easy to look at. You can send it to somebody, and even if you have to get it through somebody's firewall or something like that, you can always just convert the file to a .text file and then just have them convert it to a .bas file on the back end. So which of Femap's capabilities are available via the API? And the truth is most of what is available within the Femap user interface is also available via API. So we have a couple of different things that we're going to talk about. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Femap application object. You can think of this as the quote unquote Femap object, not an object of one of the entities within Femap. And this object is always automatically created by default within Femap's IDE. So what does it give you access to? Basically, you can access all the menu commands and toolbar commands programmatically. And again, you just need to provide the given arguments so there doesn't have to be interaction from the user in order to help kind of automate that process. It also gives you access to standard dialog boxes and other user interface items. So if you want to, if you've been in Femap and you wanted to pick a location, specify a vector, specify a plane, you can just have it bring up Femap's dialog boxes that are specifically made to do those. So then you get all the methods and everything that's already in the interface from there. Also, global settings, you know, such as preferences. Along with this, you also have tool objects. So all of Femap selection methods basically are available through the set object, and we will go into that during the demonstration portion of this session. You know, the ability to copy, move, transform entities. Reading data from external files. So you just get access to be able to use Femap to do that. You can deal with interaction between currently open models. So if anybody's ever used the file merge command inside of Femap, you actually have programmatic access to that, which was a somewhat recent addition. The other thing you can do is things like data mapping. Storing user-defined information, geometry modification, meshing, and handling of results. And what you're doing is you're actually able to lean on Femap's built-in data structures and routines in order to improve performance when you're doing those type of operations. And then we also give you access to some specialized post-processing, such as stress linearization and the calculation of beam cross sections. based on some more typical solver output. Also, finally, when we're talking about things, we're talking about individual entity objects. These are your nodes, elements, materials, properties, etc. But also things like groups, analysis sets, output sets, views, basically all that. You have some of these methods are common to all objects, like, hey, does this object exist? Others are very specific, like, hey, find me the point that is closest to these given coordinates. Or there's also some other methods that are designed to retrieve things in bulk. So let's say you just needed all the information for all of the nodes in your model because you wanted to run through them and just either check for something, list something, or just try to figure out something in particular. What you can do is you can just get them all with one call to the database. And by doing that, then you can put the data in arrays, and then you can just run through the arrays without having to have the API talk to Femap through COM. So essentially, so once you have the data on, once you've recovered the data and it's already in arrays, then you can just run through the arrays themselves without having to put all the information time and time again. Last thing that's available are Femap events. You can imagine an event is something that is occurring in Femap where you just basically need the API to wait for something to happen in most cases before it moves on to a next step. One of the most common ones would be you've automatically launched an analysis, and now you're just waiting for Femap for Simcenter Nastran to finish the analysis before it moves on to a next step, which may be just launching another analysis or move on to something like post-processing. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. You can use the callback from within Femap's IDE, or you can use any form of message handling if you're using another programming language. So obviously the documentation, as I said, is very important. So essentially, if you're looking for information about the objects or things that are actually about the Femap API, that's where you go to help programming. You can also use F1 by simply putting the cursor within an object or call within the API programming window, and it'll be context sensitive. Also, I mean, for some folks, it's a lot easier just to look at the PDF sometimes. So it's available in there. But then WinWrap and the API programming window itself has its own documentation. So you might, if you're looking for a certain math operator or something of that nature, what you can do is just go to help basic programming, and it will bring up the WinWrap help instead of the help about Femap's API specifically. So we're just going to talk about some examples, then I'm going to go over to Femap, and I'm going to show you them all after I do a little bit of just sort of live coding. So all right, so let's just say you have load values that group A already has, and they need to provide it to several other groups. What somebody could do is just put those loads into something like a CSV file, a comma separated value file. So then what you can actually do is have Femap's built-in capabilities to read from a file, just read through that .csv file and automatically create loads and boundary conditions. And here's actually all the code it takes to do that. And you can see that it's fully commented and everything. So again, you have the load values in Excel, and they're saved as a CSV file. You pick it using a standard dialog box. Those are the nodes to load, and those are the forces that are created. Create critical results, which were not calculated by the solver. So let's say you needed to calculate membrane and bending stresses on shell elements based on force and moment results, which exist in the root mean square or RMS output generated by a random response from Simcenter Nastran. It's actually a pretty simple calculation to do this, but it's just not one that is done by default by Nastran. So what you can actually do is use Femap's internal routines for processing results, which are available in something we call the results browsing object, or RBO, to create new output vectors into any number of selected output sets. So, basically, what's nice here is that, you have the existing output vectors. It brings up the dialog box that you're familiar with from Femap, again, because you have all the selection methods built in that you can access. And then you can see that you can take a look at the computed output vector. One last one is, sometimes somebody might need information from a model for reporting, say, but they don't have access to Femap. So therefore, you just kind of want to send them that data in a familiar format, something like Excel. Now, here's the thing: maybe somebody's not familiar with Femap's API with WinWrap. They're familiar with Python. Well, okay, great. Because Femap is OLE-COM based, you can have it interface directly with other applications which support COM, such as Excel. And again, after a little bit of initial setup, the API script can then be written in Python. And again, this is just VS Code. This is actually that free version of this that I mentioned. And basically, you can just write your Python code from within VS Code and have it talk to an open instance of Femap. And in this case, we just have a model containing all the element types, and it's going to automatically open Excel and send everything into there automatically. One last little thing before we get into the demo is, why would you want to use a different IDE and programming language? This is the ability to create a compiled executable for performance, obfuscation of source code, or both, or a desire to add a button within Excel to transfer data to and from Femap. Other things that you can really, if you really want to go, all out, you can do creation of a custom UI using Femap as more of a development platform, so you can embed the graphics window into any application, or you can also create dockable panes to aid in like some specific workflow or other kind of human interface controls that simply aren't available in WinWrap. So here, let's just go over to Femap, and we'll start here. All right, so again, I already have the API programming window open, but if I didn't, I could just come here to go to Tools, Programming API. All right, so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to dim something like ND as Femap dot, and then these are all of our different objects that are available. So I'm just going to say node, and then I'm just going to set ND equal to app.fe node. All right, now that this is set up, anytime I type ND in my IDE here, it's going to bring up what's available on the node object. So let's just say I wanted to get, and you can think of get as it's getting something from the database, okay? So we're going to get node 10, and we're going to do, the node color equals ND. There we go. So we're just going to get the color. Now, let's just say we wanted to instead set the color. So we can then say, just kind of do it the opposite way, equals. And what you're going to see here is these are enumerations or enums. So instead of needing to know the ID of a particular color or something of that nature, and we have these enums all over the API to try to make it easier so you don't have to always go look at the documentation. Basically, hey, I know I want to use red, so I'm going to do that. And the nice part is that if you've recently used it, that enumeration, it's going to come to the top the next time. So what we're also going to do here is now we're just going to put this back to the database, okay? And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to regenerate the window. So we're just going to do window regenerate. And if you just type in a 0 here, what you're going to see is that this is just going to do a regeneration, basically a double click in the screen to make sure that we see the update. So what I'm doing here, I'm doing something real simple, just changing the color of one of the nodes to be red, and it's this guy. All right, so that's all well and good, but let's say we wanted to actually pick a bunch of these things and do it at the same time. So what we're going to do here is use a set object instead. So I'm going to do dim nset as femap.set. I'm going to set nset equal to .fe set. So now when I go to nset, again, these are all options. So I could just add, one ID at a time, add them all by color, add them all by just so basically every method that's available for selection is also available in the set object. And that's great and all, but you know what? Sometimes we do need a little human interaction here. So we can also just use select. So I can say, hey, what am I picking? I'm going to pick elements here. And I'm going to just say true because I don't want that to, and hey, select elements, change, put a string in there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the FE modify color of elements. We're going to use our set object. So what we can do here is nset.id. I switched on the fly. It doesn't matter that I used nset and I'm changing elements. It's all based on what we did here. So, and here we'll just make them blue. Okay, and whether I want to randomize my colors, false. I just want them all to be blue. So now what I can do is, and this is the beauty of this, is when I start this, what's going to come up is it's going to bring me up my standard dialog box for entity selection. So now I can just pick any way I feel like, say okay, and voila, it was able to do that. So essentially what I did was essentially ask for one input from the user, and then we were able to automate the rest of it. And again, if you had a whole string of things you needed to do to those elements, it would just be a lot faster in order to do that. Okay. Now, one of the first things that we talked about was automatically creating loads from that CSV file. So again, here's just all the code. As you can see, I mean, it's 80 lines, but it could save you so much time without having to copy and paste it and create it and things of that nature. So we're just going to just start it here. I'm just going to pick my load values. What it's automatically going to do, it's going to make me a new load set and make me loads based on what was in that CSV file. All right, so it was that simple. Another thing we're going to do, so here you'd see that we're looking at plate X membrane forces. So if I were to take a look at what I have here in my RMS output sets, I don't have membrane and bending stress. They were not calculated by this random response analysis. Okay, so what am I going to do here? Just say okay. I'm going to just run from here. And I'm just going to say, hey, I want to just start this. What's Femap going to prompt me for? Some output sets. Which output sets do I want to put this in? Now, I could have automated for it to go through and just automatically do it for everyone that was named RMS, and we certainly could have done that. But the nice part about this is that you can also use things like the output set filtering or filtering for anything. So we're just going to type in RMS V, and we're just going to say, hey, we just want to do it in those two output sets. Pick which elements we want. Again, we could have just had it select all, but it's nice to have the option if you only need it for a bit. Because this one happened to have some triangular elements in it, it's just basically telling you that that it made all the corner 4 vectors on the triangular elements 0 because this did have corner data. Okay, terrific. All right. And then what we can do is we can just come here to post data, and now you can see I have membrane stresses and bending stresses. So we'll just go to membrane stress, and what you're going to see is it's going to be essentially the same exact contour, but as you can see, we're now looking at stress results instead of force results. Now that we have these created, let's say we just wanted to put them somewhere. What you can always do in Femap is you can always make yourself a new toolbar, call it Andy's commands. All right, and now that I have that, I can make a user command. So I can just say, hey, I want to compute. And what am I doing? I'm going to actually go pick my API programming, my API program. So it's right here, this one. So I just add it here. And then if I come over to commands, you can see that there's nothing here. This is just a tiny little, a quirk. You just have to close this and just go back into it, customize, and all of a sudden you'll see user commands at the top here. So then I can just take my command and I can say compute, and I can just put it out there on my toolbar. And there are also ways once you have your API set up to automatically create toolbars and that sort of thing. But so here, now I can just run this again. I can just use just use the previous ones that you did last time. Okay. Select all my elements again. Oh, these already exist in here. Okay. Yeah. Nah, I don't need to do it. Yeah. Don't need to do it again. Perfectly fine. Done. So and you can certainly build logic like that into the code. All right, so again, let's go back to our thought where we need to send how many elements of a particular type are in a model so somebody else can use it in a report. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to our Python code, which again, because the person was familiar with Python, and after a little bit of setup, they were able to do that. We can just run our Python file. And what that did was it sent all this information over to Excel. So now the type of elements, and of course you could use any naming you want. This is just how they're actually named by type within Femap. So, and basically just account for each one. All right. One more thing that we kind of wanted to talk about is basically using this button, a button from within Excel in order to do something. So I'm actually going to, I actually have a different Femap open. So I'm going to just try to use my API here. This instance of Femap is the one I'm currently in and I'm using and everything, but just with some limitations in COM, by default, Femap is always, the Femap API is always going to work with the first instance of Femap that was open. So even if I have this one open, I can say create my Femap group and, well, nothing happened, but, well, it did happen over here. So what I would do is, the nice part is that if I were just to open that model up inside of the same instance of Femap, it's always working with the active model when you're in the same instance of Femap. So again, I could just come here, say create a group. Okay, created my group there. And I could take a look at, how it automatically created me a group from a button within Excel. All right. So now we're going to come back to the PowerPoint here. So again, maybe something of a more complicated user interface is needed. So this was something that was done actually quite a long time ago by someone who currently works in Femap development, but actually happened to work at Saratech. A ways back was they created this thing that was referred to as an RTE reader, and we'll kind of show you what's going on with it coming up. So it reads and parses output from a different program, and the nice part was it was able to create 2 and 3D models with appropriate loads, temperatures, constraints. Actually allowed the engineers to look at the fidelity of the mesh, and it was a fully customized UI designed around basically 2 workflows. It was written in VB.NET using Visual Studio, took about a month. But again, significant reduction in model creation time. So the 2D models were all of a sudden being made in seconds instead of 2 to 3 days, and the 3D models were created in minutes rather than 5 to 6 days. And that's just because what this needed was a very structured mesh in order to get good results. So what you can see here is it was kind of like a 3-step process. You would kind of read the input file, and then you could take a look at various station parameters, and it would give you a diagram of what was going to be made for you. And then you could come over here to model creation, and you could see that you could either make a 2D section or you could make a 3D thrust chamber. So again, fully mapped mesh, fully all the boundary conditions automatically created for you. Or, you could make a partial or full 3D model, and these are all just wonderfully high quality, well-shaped hex elements that were being made without having to break up the geometry or do anything of that nature in order to get a perfectly mapped type of hex mesh. Okay, so we're, kind of what resources are available to help you now that you're, to use the API. The very first thing to always look at is the custom tools toolbar. So these are, there's a large variety of API scripts that are shipped with every release of Femap and can be launched using the custom tools toolbar. The actual source code for all the scripts can actually be found in the API folder of the Femap install directories for our current version 2512. You would find it in like program files, Siemens, Femap 2512 API. And what you can do with the API programming window is essentially just go in there and you can just pick any of the .bas files that are in there, and you can open them up, start modifying them. Most of them are very well commented, so you should be able to follow what's going on in order to use that to write your own APIs. Also, if you've created an API and you want to add it to the API menu, what you can do is you can just use the custom tools add tools command, and it will pop it in there. But the other thing you can do is just simply save your .bas file into the API folder, either the API folder itself, kind of the root, or any of the subfolders, and then it'll just automatically appear in the menu structure. If you want to keep your tools separate from the ones shipped by Femap, that's okay. Essentially, what you can do is, on the same toolbar, there's custom tools and user tools. So what you can do there is you can specify, you can either use the user tools directory command and specify a directory path to a place where you've set up to put your APIs. Again, it works the same way as custom tools. So if there's subfolders, it'll make you a sub menu. Otherwise, all the commands will just be at the top level. Or you can also specify these via file preferences on the library startup tab, and then just specify the path in the user tools path field. Probably one of the best places to look for API help, especially if you're looking for something specific, is to use the help Femap user community command. So this is the Femap user community that exists for essentially all kinds of Femap answers. But if you're specifically looking for things to help you with the API, basically what you can do is you can hit the product search tab, and then you can just type in API. And if you want, you can also type in some additional keywords, and it'll search to see if it can find it. If you just type API, it'll just bring up everything that someone has kind of tagged as an API article, post, what have you. And just know that Femap users from around the globe sometimes post their own API scripts, and they're also many times are super willing to help answer questions about the API and just Femap in general, using the Femap community. So, I mean, it's always a great place to look, regardless if you're looking for API or for specific help on another Femap issue. All right, so in summary, why use the Femap API? And the simple answer is, why would you not want to use the Femap API if it can essentially do anything I've shown? And if you're a better programmer than, say, I am, or say, most people who aren't super familiar with coding, but let's say you are, then the sky's the limit of what you can do with the Femap API, because the automation that it can just allow engineering teams to move beyond the time-consuming processes and adopt more efficient, standardized workflows. You can also kind of reduce errors by just reducing variability. And again, any time you can take a little bit of drudgery off an analyst's plate, or help a design engineer, with some sort of predefined workflow that they can use. I mean, you're just helping them out tremendously. And again, depending on where you start, even if you start simple, and this is certainly what we would recommend, always start simple. But then from there, using the resources that are available, and actually maybe even taking a simple kind of how to code, just kind of VBA for beginners or something along those lines. Again, then the sky's the limit, and what you're really going to be doing is you're going to be improving, the performance and consistency of your simulations, which leads to the delivery of more reliable and repeatable results, which at the end of the day, that's all anybody's really looking to do when they're doing simulation. All right, Katie, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of that. We do have a couple questions. One question we got was, early in the presentation, it mentioned that API is OLE and COM based. What does that mean?
So when we're talking about COM, what we're really talking about is the Microsoft COM, component object model. So it's essentially where servers and clients can communicate based on a standard binary format. It's essentially it's a software architecture promoting language independence, code reuse. It allows you to access functions, methods, and objects. So published by quote unquote the automation server, which again could be Femap, Excel, Word, or even a DLL or a dynamic link library. So and that is a way, especially if you're doing something in Femap, you can actually have Femap. If somebody has handed you a DLL, what you can actually do is you can have Femap feed that DLL and have it do things, and then come back with results from that. And I know in particular that's the way one of those fastener programs I mentioned earlier works.
Awesome. These sessions are short and we can only get to so much. So if you are interested in more hands-on and in-depth learning, we have all these courses that you can sign yourself or your team up for, including a Femap API course. So please reach out to us if you're interested in any of these. You can also find them on our website.